In today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive look at the Retention Center. The Retention Center is an excellent tool for discovering which students in your course are at risk of failing. It also gives you a great way to look at an overview of your performance in a class, and it can help you to identify your high performing students. So in order to utilize the Retention Center, we should first take a look at how to access it. And there are actually two ways to access the Retention Center. The first way is through the global navigation menu. In the upper right-hand corner of Blackboard, you should see a very thin gray bar with your name on it and an upward pointing arrow to the right. If you click that arrow, a menu appears, and one of the icons on that menu is a pair of arrows, one pointing up, one pointing down. If you click on those arrows, you're going to access a rundown view of the Retention Center. So this shows you the retention centers for every class that you're labeled as an instructor for, and a risk breakdown, which is a very kind of overview, skimming the top of the surface look at the retention center. This tool is excellent for navigating between course retention centers. So if you just wanted a quick view of what was going on in all of your classes, you could easily navigate between your courses by selecting them on the left side. If you wanted to take a look at the individual course retention center, you want to first select the class on the left and then hit the See Details option on the right. The other way to access the retention center is to go to the individual course in Blackboard. On the left-hand side of the screen, the table of contents menu, which is that gray bar that slides in and out, there should be a section labeled Evaluation. Under the Evaluation section, you will see the Retention Center link. So when you click on the Retention Center, you should see something very similar to this. Your colors may vary because of your course theme. You may also see some different items on the right-hand side of the screen based on how you have set up your Retention Center. But by default, your Retention Center is going to monitor 4 activities or behaviors that would put a student at risk of failing the course. The first is missed deadlines. These missed deadlines are actually established by the instructor. When you create content in Blackboard, such as tests, discussion boards, or drop boxes, Blackboard will automatically ask you when is the due date for this assignment. It's an optional setting, you don't have to put it in, but if you do, Blackboard will then monitor whether or not students actually miss those deadlines. The second is the grade alerts. Grade alerts look at whether or not a student's average in the class is below 25% of everyone else's average. So is the student performing on par with their classmates? The activity alert looks at the student's performance in the class over the last week, and it actually monitors whether the student is 20% below what everyone else is doing in the course for that week. And finally, the access alert looks at whether or not the student has logged into the class over the last 5 days. If you can't remember all of that, don't worry. There's a really quick and easy way to access that information, which I'll cover with you later. So one of the first things you want to do if you're utilizing the Retention Center is actually look at the risk bar, which appears right over the names of those alerts. In this case, it's red and it's got the number 23 on the far right-hand side. If you click the risk bar, you'll notice that it immediately begins to break down each of the alerts and tell you how many students fall into those categories. So I can see that 23 students have missed deadlines and 20 students in this class have low grades. If I click on any individual section of that bar, so let's say in this case I click that turquoise section, I'm going to automatically receive a pop-up menu that gives me the ability to notify those 23 students. So let's say these 23 people have missed a Chapter 2 test over the last week. If I click that notify option, Blackboard will automatically connect to its email tool. It will automatically populate the names of those 23 students in, and I can send them a really quick email. So I might send a message that says, hey, I'm going to take off 10 points for every day that this is late, but please go in and complete the Chapter 2 test. And so it can be very useful for monitoring those 4 default behaviors. Another way in which the Retention Center can help you with at-risk students is by individually seeing the details related to that student. So if you click on any individual student's name in the risk table, what you'll see are individualized settings on that particular student. And there are a lot of ways that you can use this. The first thing that we see is that the risk factors that the table in the center are monitoring appear for this individual student. So this student has missed 9 deadlines. They have a 58% in the class, and the student hasn't logged in the last 179 days. In this case, this is a course that hasn't been taught for a couple of semesters, so that's not really a surprise. But this is a student I should be concerned about. And so the easiest way for me to keep an eye on this student is to actually use the monitor tool. So if you click that little star that appears below the student's name, what that will do is place the student on the right-hand side of your retention center. So if this is a student where, hey, maybe early in the semester you're struggling and I just want to go ahead and keep an eye on you so that we can get you through this course, that's a really quick and easy way to monitor the student. The second thing that these individual settings do is they allow me to make notes about this student. Now, there are lots of ways that you can make notes about a student in Blackboard. If you click the Full Grade Center, you can create a column that allows you to simply input text in the Full Grade Center. And you can see that in the very top line of the Full Grade Center pop-up menu on the left-hand side here. Now, there are some risks associated with that, right? If you're not really careful with those Full Grade Center settings, you might accidentally show the student those notes. Also, the amount of characters that you can use are very limiting. So I think it's somewhere around 40 characters. So that might be a great place to keep a note that, hey, the student prefers to be called John. But if I wanted to make more detailed notes about that student, I can't really do it in the Full Grade Center. And if you're interested in how to create that text column, I'll link a video in the description on how you can actually do that. With the Retention Center, however, I have the ability to create much more detailed notes. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I can click the Add Note option and create notes that the student is absolutely not going to see because students don't have access to a Retention Center. And there are lots of things I might want to monitor about a student. Maybe this is a dual enrolled student. Maybe this student told me, I'm going to miss the 6th week of class because I have orientation at my job. This is a great place to keep all of that information in a single central area. The other way that you can use the Retention Center is actually as a record-keeping notification tool. So Blackboard, when you email a student, doesn't automatically keep a record of your emails. If you wanted to search those emails, you would need to log into your school email address and look through them. But if you notify a student through the Retention Center, if you click that notify option, what's going to happen is you'll get an individualized email setting. So it's going to pop up just like an email, and you can send the student a notification. Hey, I noticed that you missed the Chapter 2 test. What's going on? Or why haven't you been to my class in the last 2 weeks? And Blackboard's going to keep a record of that email in the Retention Center. Now, let me be very clear. This only works if you click the notify option through the Retention Center. But when you do that, you have a great way of seeing all of the information that you have about a student. So this is a student that is at risk of failing the class. This is a student I know is a dual enrolled student. This student did not submit their midterm project. And this is a student I sent an email to. On the far left-hand side of the screen, one of the really convenient things here is that there's actually notification history. So I can see the exact dates and times that I sent these notifications to the student. And just so we're clear, anything that you use the add a note option to input, the student can't see. Anything that you click the notify option to input is going to send an email to the student. But this is a great way to keep in a single place everything I know about the student. So now I'm not having to go to my grade book and go to my attendance records and go to my written notes and check my email to see what's going on with this student. All that information is in one central spot for me. The next tool that you want to understand about the retention center is actually the customization option. And as I mentioned before, you don't need to memorize what those alerts are defaulting to monitoring, because by clicking customize, you can actually see that information. So if we click that customize option in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, we can see the 4 default rules that are on the retention table. And you can actually edit these rules. So if you click those downward pointing arrows, you can edit any of the rules. I went in on this particular example and edited the grade rule because I'm not interested in students who are performing 25% below the class average, but any person in my class who has less than 700 points out of 1,000 is failing. So if a student has less than 700 points, I want a notification about that. Now, when you are experimenting with these tools, you may find that it's more useful for you to monitor some other behavior. And one of the things I mentioned is that the retention center is a great way to identify your at-risk students, but it's also a great way to find your high-performing students. So if we click Create Rule in the upper right-hand corner, you have the option to create rules based on those 4 kind of generalized categories: deadlines, access, activity, and grades. Now, the individualized settings for each of those rules are very specific, and so I encourage you to experiment and play around to figure out which rules work best for you. It is, however, very important for you to note 3 things. First, when it comes to how the rules appear, if you access that edit menu, there is an option that says include in risk table. You cannot remove the default rules from the risk table. They will always remain. You can change what they're monitoring. So I can change whether this is monitoring a specific assignment or whether it's looking at, course access from the last 5 days or the last 2 days, but you can't remove it from the table. The second thing you want to keep in mind is when you create a new rule, you'll see an option that asks, do you want to include this in the risk table? And when you select that option, the risk table, as you might formally think about it, is not going to change. So we can see in this menu that I still see those 4 main default rules. But on the right-hand side of the table, underneath my monitored students, I can see the alert I set up. So in this case, this was actually an alert to identify high-performing students. I don't want to know who's failing my class. I want to know every student who has an 80 or above in this course. And now if I click where it says 6 students in that purple box, it would pull up a list for me of the students who are high-performing students. So depending on what you're trying to monitor, do I want to see who's logging into this class every single day? Do I want to see people who have missed deadlines for a specific assignment instead of missed deadlines within the last week? All of that can kind of be parsed out through those customization options. And if you're ever struggling with those options, please feel free to send us an email over at Distance Ed. We're happy to help you set them up. So the final thing that the retention center can be really useful for is actually looking at your own activity in a course. How is what you're doing in the course affecting how the students perform? So when you look at that bottom table, the retention center is going to default to showing you 4 different ways that you're behaving in the class. So the first is assignments, and it's going to show you here are assignments that you have not graded. And if you click on any of those individual assignments, it's going to take you to the needs grading section of the full grade center. So it'll take you to an area where you can easily see a list of everything there. Your interaction and collaboration will allow you to see individualized settings. So if I click, test 1, I'm going to see everything in the class that needs to be graded. If I click discussion boards, I'm just going to see the discussion boards in the class. And again, you can see that option under interaction and collaboration. Learner support is going to show you essentially what an activity alert looks like for a student. And so with the student's activity alert, we're looking at what they've done in the last week. With learner support, you're going to see every announcement that you've posted in the last week. You're going to be able to see, here's how you're interacting with the students. And finally, course design shows you an overview of what you've done. So course design will show you, here's a test that you've opened this week. Here's the announcements that you've posted this week. Here's a great way of looking at what you've done in the class. So the retention center overall can be a really useful tool if you understand all of the items there. And it's great because it can be customized to suit your needs. Maybe it's more important that students log in on a 10-day basis instead of a 2-day basis. Maybe you want to make sure that students don't fail your midterm exam. All of those things can be monitored through the retention center. Thank you so much for taking the time to look at this video. If you have questions, comments, you want to give us any feedback, I would love for you to reach out to us via email at distanceed@augustatech.edu. We also value your input on how this training helps you or what you would like to see training address. So if you'll complete our short survey, it's also linked in the description of this video. Thank you so much, and we hope that this helps.